Hello, everyone. Welcome to Untold Story, the channel where we explore the most heroic moments in history. Today we are going to delve into one of the most inspiring and decisive episodes in the history of Israel, the Maccabean Revolt, which took place between 167 and 160 BC. This period allowed the Jewish people to preserve their identity and faith in the midst of foreign domination and established a brief autonomy that marked a turning point in their history. To understand this conflict, we must analyze the context. In the 2nd century BC, the Seleucid Empire was one of the powers that dominated the region, a vast territory that had emerged after the death of Alexander the Great in 323. Alexander had conquered much of the known world, but his empire crumbled after his passing. Instead of a continuity of his reign, his generals divided their conquests, and there arose the Ptolemies who ruled Egypt, the Antigonids in Macedonia, and more relevant to our topic, the Seleucids in Syria, who dominated Judea, the homeland of the Jewish people. These dynasties not only competed militarily, but also sought to impose Hellenic culture. When Antiochus IV Epiphanes ascended the throne of the Seleucid Empire in 175, his ambitions went beyond maintaining control over his territories. He had a vision of a culturally unified empire, and for him, that meant that the various peoples under his rule would adopt Greek culture and religion. Judea, which until then had enjoyed relative autonomy under the Ptolemies, passed into Seleucid hands and became the target of the forced Hellenization that Antiochus aggressively pushed. However, for Jewish society, which was deeply devout and with a deep-rooted religious and cultural tradition, this imposition was perceived as a direct threat to its identity and spirituality. Antiochus issued a series of decrees aimed at eliminating Jewish practices and replacing them with Hellenic rites. Among these impositions were strict prohibitions on customs essential to Jews, such as Shabbat observance, circumcision, and Torah reading. But the aggression did not stop there. In an act that the Jewish people interpreted as a desecration, the Temple of Jerusalem, the holiest site of the Jewish faith, was turned into a shrine in honor of Zeus. The populace was forced to participate in pagan sacrifices, and the temple was adorned with Greek images and symbols that deeply offended their beliefs. These acts represented not only a cultural attack, but also a humiliation for the Jewish people, as the temple was the spiritual heart of their religious and community life. The situation became untenable, and discontent was accumulating in the Jewish communities that were reluctant to lose their spiritual freedom. Finally, the outbreak of the revolt occurred in the small town of Modin, where a priest named Mattathias, along with his 5 sons, refused to obey the order of the Seleucid authorities to perform a pagan sacrifice. In an act of defiance that would resonate throughout the Jewish people, Mattathias killed a Seleucid official who was trying to enforce this rite, marking the beginning of the Maccabean Revolt. Mattathias, although older, assumed the leadership of this initial rebellion, but shortly thereafter died, leaving the command in the hands of his son Judas, nicknamed Maccabeus. This nickname, which means hammer, alludes to the strength and determination with which Judas led the movement. Although the Maccabees lacked the resources and military strength of the Seleucid Empire, Judas's cunning and knowledge of the local terrain gave them an advantage. Using guerrilla tactics, Judas and his men ambushed Seleucid soldiers in mountainous areas, taking advantage of their knowledge of Judean geography. These surprise attacks were devastating to the Seleucids, who, despite their superiority in numbers and weaponry, were not accustomed to fighting in such hostile terrain and in such conditions. One of the most significant victories of the Maccabees was the Battle of Beth Zur in 164. In this confrontation, Judas' army managed to defeat a much larger Seleucid force, allowing them to take Jerusalem and, even more importantly, regain control of the temple in Jerusalem. After years of desecration, the Maccabees began the process of purifying the temple, an act that had both religious and symbolic value for the Jewish people. According to tradition, during this rededication of the temple, a small amount of pure oil was found, enough for only 1 day, but which miraculously burned for 8 days, allowing more oil to be produced. This miracle is celebrated annually on the holiday of Hanukkah, which symbolizes not only military victory, but also the spiritual resilience of the Jewish people in times of oppression. Even though the Maccabees succeeded in taking Jerusalem and restoring the temple, the fighting was far from over. The Seleucids continued to pose a constant threat, and Judas Maccabeus continued to lead his army in several additional engagements. Although they counted on the fervor and bravery of their fighters, the Maccabees faced an enemy who had at his disposal the vast resources of the Seleucid Empire. In 160, Judas was killed in battle, which dealt a devastating blow to the movement. However, the resistance did not crumble with his death. Jonathan, one of Judas' brothers, assumed the leadership, and under his leadership the Maccabees consolidated their positions. As the conflict dragged on, the political situation within the Seleucid Empire began to crumble, with internal power struggles weakening its control over the provinces. Taking advantage of this situation, Jonathan and his brother Simon managed to negotiate a certain autonomy for Judea. Over time, this resulted in the founding of the Hasmonean dynasty, an independent Jewish line of government that would rule Judea for nearly a century. This was the first Jewish self-government since the fall of the Kingdom of Judah, and its establishment represented a triumph over foreign oppression. The Maccabean Revolt was much more than a series of battles. It was a struggle for identity, culture, and spiritual freedom. Its success inspired other oppressed nations to rise up and fight for their freedom, and it sent a clear message to the ancient world. Empires are not invincible, and peoples fighting for their freedom and beliefs can challenge even the most formidable powers. The legacy of the Maccabees endures to this day, especially through the holiday of Hanukkah, which commemorates both the miracle of the oil and the perseverance of a people in their struggle to preserve their identity. Hanukkah is an annual reminder that religious and cultural freedom are fundamental rights worth fighting for. Moreover, this episode remains a beacon of how faith, determination, and unity can triumph over oppression, regardless of how powerful the enemy is. In conclusion, the Maccabean Revolt was a watershed moment in Israel's history. Not only did it allow the Jewish people to restore their religious freedom, but it also led to a period of political autonomy that would last for nearly a century. The strategies of Judas Maccabeus and the courage of his brothers changed the course of history, leaving an indelible mark that has inspired generations of Jews and non-Jews alike. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Untold Story. If you liked this journey through the past, don't forget to subscribe, like, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our future episodes. See you in the next one.